The prison cafeteria fell silent the moment the new guy walked in. Tray in hand, head down, moving like a ghost through a room full of wolves. From the corner table, the biggest inmate in Block C, known for breaking noses just for fun, grinned. He cracked an egg on his tray, dripping yolk down his fingers, and shouted, "Hey, new boy, you hungry for protein?" The others laughed as he flicked the egg at the new inmate's shirt. Yellow spilled down his chest. Still, the newcomer didn't flinch, didn't even look up. The bully slammed his tray down, stood, and got right in his face. "You deaf punk!" I said, but before he could finish the sentence, the new inmate's hand shot out, lightning fast. One twist, one strike, and in a blur, the bully was on the floor, gasping for air. Every eye in the cafeteria froze. No one moved. The silence was deafening, because that's when someone whispered, "Wait, that's the guy who used to fight in the MMA. Stay with me until the end, because what happened next turned that entire prison upside down." Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. The steel gates of Millbrook Correctional Center clanged shut with the finality of a coffin lid. Inside those concrete walls, survival meant understanding one simple rule. Respect was earned through fear, and fear was earned through violence. It was a code that had governed the prison for decades, and every inmate who walked through those doors either learned it fast or became a casualty of it. Danny Rodriguez had been counting down to this day for 3 years, not because he was getting out, but because his reputation had been building on the outside, and now it was time to cement his legacy on the inside. At 6'4" and 250 pounds of pure muscle, Danny was what other inmates called a natural-born predator. His massive frame was covered in tattoos that told the story of his rise through the ranks of Block C's hierarchy. The spiderweb on his elbow marked his time in solitary. The teardrops under his eye counted the lives he'd claimed, both inside these walls and on the streets. But it wasn't just his size that made Danny dangerous. It was his mind. He had an instinct for weakness, a radar that could spot vulnerability from across a crowded yard. He knew which new arrivals would fold under pressure, and which ones might need a more persuasive approach. His crew of loyal followers treated him like royalty, and the guards looked the other way because Danny kept order in his own brutal fashion. When Danny spoke, people listened. When Danny moved, people scattered. And when Danny decided you were a problem, you became a solution real quick. That Tuesday morning started like any other. The breakfast bell echoed through the corridors at exactly 6:30, and inmates shuffled toward the cafeteria with the practiced resignation of men who had learned to find routine in chaos. Danny held court at his usual table, surrounded by his inner circle. These weren't just followers. They were disciples of violence who had earned their spots through unwavering loyalty and a complete willingness to do whatever Danny asked. No questions asked. There was Marcus, a wiry man with quick hands and quicker temper who handled Danny's business arrangements. Next to him sat Big Mike, whose name said everything you needed to know about his role in the organization. On Danny's other side was Snake, a quiet man with cold eyes who specialized in making problems disappear permanently. Together, they formed the backbone of Block C's power structure, and their morning ritual of surveying the cafeteria was as much about maintaining control as it was about eating breakfast. The routine was always the same. Danny would scan the room like a general surveying his territory, making mental notes of who sat where, who talked to whom, and most importantly, who might be stepping out of line. His eyes would linger on potential threats, catalog new arrivals, and identify opportunities to expand his influence. It was a chess game played with human pieces, and Danny had been the grandmaster for longer than most inmates could remember. But this Tuesday was different. This Tuesday brought fresh meat. The new inmate entered the cafeteria with a deliberate calm that immediately caught Danny's attention. While most fresh arrivals either swaggered in with false bravado or shuffled in with obvious fear, this guy was something else entirely. He moved with purpose but without aggression, confident but not confrontational. His orange jumpsuit hung loose on a frame that was clearly athletic but not oversized. Dark hair, olive skin, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of quiet intensity that made Danny's predator instincts start tingling. Well, 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 Danny muttered to his crew, never taking his eyes off the newcomer. Looks like we got ourselves a mystery man. Snake leaned forward, studying the new arrival with professional interest. Want me to run a background check? Find out what he's in for? Danny waved him off with a dismissive gesture. Nah, more fun to figure it out the old-fashioned way. The new inmate collected his breakfast tray with the same measured movements he'd used to enter the room. Watery scrambled eggs, burnt toast, and what passed for coffee in this place. He didn't complain, didn't make faces at the quality, just accepted what was offered and began looking for a place to sit. That's when Danny decided it was time to establish the pecking order. Danny had a ritual for breaking in new inmates, a carefully choreographed performance designed to demonstrate his authority while entertaining his followers. It usually started with something small, something that could be dismissed as an accident if the guards were watching too closely. But it always escalated until the message was crystal clear. Danny Rodriguez ran Block C, and everyone else was just visiting. He cracked an egg against the edge of his tray, letting the yolk drip through his fingers in a deliberately messy display. The yellow liquid pooled on his plate, creating a disgusting mixture with the already questionable breakfast offerings. His crew watched with anticipation, knowing what was coming next. This was theater, and Danny was about to give them a show. "Hey, new boy!" Danny's voice boomed across the cafeteria, cutting through the morning conversations like a knife. "You look hungry for some protein." The room began to quiet down as heads turned toward Danny's table. Inmates who had witnessed this routine before started moving away from the potential blast zone, while others leaned forward with the morbid curiosity of spectators at a car crash. The guards at the far end of the cafeteria noticed the shift in atmosphere but didn't move to intervene. They had learned long ago that Danny's morning entertainment was better left undisturbed, as long as it didn't get too out of hand. The new inmate paused in his search for a table, but he didn't turn around. He didn't acknowledge the taunt. He just stood there, tray in hand, as if he was waiting for something. That lack of reaction only fueled Danny's desire to escalate the situation. With theatrical flair, Danny flicked the broken egg across the cafeteria. It arced through the air, trailing yolk and shell fragments, before splattering against the new inmate's back. The yellow mess spread across the orange fabric, creating a disgusting stain that would mark him as Danny's target for everyone to see. Still, the newcomer didn't react. He didn't spin around in anger. He didn't cower in fear. He just stood there, completely still, as if the egg hadn't hit him at all. This was not the response Danny was expecting, and it was starting to make him look weak in front of his crew. "You think this is funny?" Danny's voice carried a dangerous edge as he rose from his seat. The metal chair scraped against the concrete floor with a sound that made several nearby inmates flinch. "I'm talking to you, fresh meat." The cafeteria had gone completely silent now. Even the kitchen staff had stopped their clattering and were watching through the serving window. This was the moment every new inmate faced in Block C, the moment that would define the next however many years of their sentence. Submit to Danny's authority, or face the consequences. Danny took his time walking across the cafeteria, his boots echoing with each deliberate step. His crew followed at a respectful distance, ready to jump in if needed, but this was Danny's show. The new inmate still hadn't turned around, still hadn't acknowledged what was happening. He just stood there with his tray, looking at the empty tables ahead of him like he was choosing where to have a peaceful breakfast. That calm indifference was driving Danny absolutely insane. "You deaf? Or just stupid?" Danny's voice was rising now, loud enough that the guards would have to intervene soon if this kept escalating. But Danny knew exactly how to walk that line. He'd been playing this game for years. "When I talk to you, You answer. That's how respect works in here. Finally, the newcomer turned around. His movements were slow, controlled, like he was deciding whether this situation was even worth his attention. When his eyes met Danny's, there was something unsettling about them. Not fear, not anger, just a kind of professional assessment, like he was looking at Danny and calculating something. I heard you, the new inmate said quietly. His voice was steady, completely unaffected by the tension crackling through the room. I just don't see what that has to do with me eating my breakfast. The response caught Danny off guard. Most new inmates either cowered or tried to act tough. This guy was doing neither. He was just standing there, completely relaxed, like Danny Rodriguez was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Don't see what it has to do with you, Danny repeated, his face flushing red. The disrespect was intolerable. In front of the entire cafeteria, in front of his crew, this nobody was treating him like he didn't matter. Maybe you need a lesson in how things work around here. Without warning, Danny shoved the newcomer hard in the chest. It should have sent him stumbling backward, maybe even knocked him down. But the man barely moved. He absorbed the impact, shifted his weight slightly, and remained exactly where he had been standing. It was like pushing against a wall. Danny blinked in confusion. He had put real force behind that shove, enough to move a man half his size. But this guy hadn't budged an inch. Something was wrong here. Something Danny couldn't quite figure out. Did you just ignore me? Danny's voice was getting louder, more desperate. The crowd was watching, waiting to see how their king would handle this unprecedented challenge to his authority. Nobody ignores Danny Rodriguez. Nobody. The new inmate set his tray down on a nearby table with careful precision, like he was handling something valuable. When he straightened up, there was still no aggression in his posture, no threatening gestures, but something had changed in his eyes. They had gone cold, professional, like a switch had been flipped. My name is Alex Santos, he said quietly, and I'm just trying to serve my time in peace. The name hit Danny like a lightning bolt. Alex Santos. He'd heard that name before, whispered in the rec room by inmates who followed mixed martial arts. Santos had been a rising star in the UFC before his arrest, undefeated in 12 professional fights, known for his devastating ground game and lightning-fast submissions. But that was years ago. And Danny had convinced himself those stories were exaggerated. Prison stories, always out of proportion. Santos got blown. Danny forced out a laugh, but it sounded hollow even, to his own ears. Like I'm supposed to be impressed by some washed-up fighter? This ain't the octagon, tough guy. This is my house. But even as he said the words, Danny could feel his confidence wavering. The way Santos moved, the way he carried himself, the complete lack of fear in his eyes. This wasn't some street fighter pretending to be tough. This was a trained killer who had spent years perfecting the art of human destruction. Santos took a small step forward, and suddenly Danny could see it. The subtle shift in balance. The way Santos's hands hung loose at his sides, ready to move in any direction. The predator instinct that had served Danny so well for years was now screaming at him to back away. But backing down in front of the entire cafeteria would destroy everything he had built. Your house? Santos asked, tilting his head slightly. Funny, from where I'm standing, it looks like a place where bullies pick on people who can't fight back, where grown men throw food like children having tantrums. The insult stung worse than any physical blow could have. Danny's reputation was built on fear and respect, and Santos was dismantling both with surgical precision. The Tomu other inmates were starting murmur, sensing that the power dynamic in Block C might be about to shift in ways they had never imagined. You think you're better than me? Danny snarled, his massive frame towering over Santos. You think because you used to fight in a cage that makes you special? Let me tell you something, pretty boy. I've been breaking men in here since before you knew what a prison jumpsuit looked like. Santos nodded thoughtfully, like he was considering Danny's words carefully. You're probably right about that. You've got experience, size, home field advantage. Probably have a dozen guys ready to jump in if things go bad. For a moment, Danny thought he was finally getting through to the man. Finally making him understand the reality of the situation. But then Santos smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression. The thing is, Santos continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, I spent 10 years learning how to hurt people efficiently. And size doesn't matter when you know exactly where to apply pressure. The threat was delivered so casually, so matter-of-factly, that it took Danny a moment to process what he'd just heard. By the time his brain caught up, Santos had already moved. It happened faster than anyone in the cafeteria could follow. One moment Danny was looming over Santos, using his size to intimidate. The next moment, Santos's hand had shot out in a lightning-fast motion that caught Danny's wrist, twisted it at an impossible angle, and sent waves of agony shooting up his arm. Danny tried to pull away, tried to use his superior strength to break free. But Santos's grip was like iron. Every movement Danny made only seemed to increase the pain, as if Santos was using Danny's own force against him. The big man's face went pale as he felt bones grinding against each other in ways they weren't meant to move. Here's the thing about leverage, Santos said conversationally, as if he was giving a physics lesson instead of demonstrating a joint lock that could snap Danny's wrist like a twig. It's not about how strong you are. It's about understanding mechanics. Danny opened his mouth to scream, to call for his crew, to do something to regain control of the situation. But before he could make a sound, Santos's other hand moved in a precise strike that hit a pressure point in Danny's neck. The big man's voice died in his throat, and suddenly he couldn't breathe properly. His vision started to blur around the edges. Now, Santos continued in the same calm tone, I'm going to let go of your wrist, and you're going to sit down and finish your breakfast. We're going to pretend this never happened, and tomorrow we'll start fresh. Does that sound reasonable? Danny tried to nod, but Santos's grip made even that simple movement impossible. The pressure point technique was cutting off just enough blood flow to make the world spin without causing permanent damage. It was surgical, precise, the work of someone who understood exactly how much force was needed to control without killing. Around them, the cafeteria remained frozen in stunned silence. Danny's crew sat at their table, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. Big Mike's hand moved toward the shank hidden in his waistband, but Snake grabbed his wrist, shaking his head slowly. Something about Santos's calm demeanor suggested that any escalation would end badly for everyone involved. Good choice, Santos said, noticing the silent communication between the crew members. He released Danny's wrist and stepped back, giving the bigger man space to recover. Danny stumbled backward, clutching his arm and gasping for breath. The color slowly returned to his face, but the humiliation burned brighter than any physical pain. This isn't over, Danny wheezed, trying to salvage some dignity from the situation. You think you can just walk in here and disrespect me? You have no idea what you've started. Santos picked up his breakfast tray and turned toward an empty table near the windows. Actually, I think you started it when you threw food at me. I just finished it. The casual dismissal stung worse than the physical defeat. Danny Rodriguez had built his reputation on being the most dangerous man in Block C, and now he'd been handled like an amateur by someone who looked like he belonged in a corporate boardroom rather than a maximum security prison. As Santos walked away, conversations slowly resumed throughout the cafeteria, but they were different now. Hushed whispers replaced the usual morning banter. Inmates glanced nervously between Danny's table and Santos's solitary position by the windows. The power structure that had governed Block C for years had just been shaken to its foundation. Marcus leaned across the table, his voice barely audible. Boss, maybe we should let this one slide. Regroup, figure out our next move. Danny's face flushed red with rage. Let it slide? Every inmate in this place just watched me get punked by some pretty boy fighter. If I don't respond, I'm finished. We're all finished. Big Mike cracked his knuckles, eager for violence. Just say the word, Danny. We can take him in the showers, make it look like an accident. No, Snake interjected quietly. Look at him. Really look at him. The crew turned their attention to Santos, who was eating his breakfast with the same measured calm he'd displayed throughout the confrontation. There was something unsettling about his composure, the way he seemed completely unaffected by what had just happened. Most inmates would be looking over their shoulders, waiting for retaliation. Santos acted like he was having breakfast at a hotel. He's not scared, Snake continued. After what just happened, after humiliating you in front of everyone, he's not even watching his back. That means either he's crazy or he knows something we don't. Danny wanted to dismiss Snake's concerns, but his lieutenant had survived 15 years in the system by reading situations correctly. If Snake was worried, maybe there was good reason to be. Find out everything you can about Alex Santos, Danny ordered. Prison records, street history, who he knows on the outside. I want to know what we're dealing with before we make our next move. The rest of breakfast passed in tense silence. Danny's crew ate quickly, their usual morning ritual of surveying their territory, replaced by anxious glances toward Santos's table. Other inmates gave both groups a wide berth, sensing that Block C was sitting on a powder keg waiting to explode. Santos finished his meal, cleaned his tray, and walked out of the cafeteria with the same unhurried pace he'd maintained throughout the entire encounter. He didn't look back, didn't acknowledge the dozens of eyes tracking his movement. He just left, as if nothing significant had happened. But something significant had happened. Word spread through the prison with the speed of wildfire. By lunchtime, every inmate in Millbrook knew that Danny Rodriguez had been embarrassed by the new guy. The stories grew with each telling, becoming more elaborate, more dramatic. Some claimed Santos had knocked Danny unconscious with a single blow. Others swore they'd seen Danny begging for mercy. The truth was almost more unsettling than the exaggerations. Santos hadn't used excessive force, hadn't caused lasting damage, hadn't even raised his voice. He'd simply demonstrated that all of Danny's size and reputation meant nothing against proper technique and training. It was a masterclass in controlled violence that left everyone wondering what else Santos was capable of. In the prison library that afternoon, Santos sat reading a worn copy of Marcus Aurelius, seemingly oblivious to the whispered conversations happening around him. Inmates would walk past his table, stealing glances, trying to reconcile the mild-mannered man with the stories they'd heard about the cafeteria incident. Jerry Martinez, a lifer who'd been in Millbrook longer than anyone could remember, approached Santos's table with the careful respect reserved for dangerous unknowns. Jerry had seen every type of inmate walk through these doors over the decades. He'd watched tough guys fall, seen quiet ones survive, and learned to read the signs that separated predators from prey. "Mind if I sit?" Jerry asked politely. Santos looked up from his book and gestured to the empty chair across from him. "Please do." Jerry settled into the chair, studying Santos with experienced eyes. "You caused quite a stir this morning." "I was just trying to eat breakfast in peace," Santos replied, closing his book but keeping his finger on the page to mark his place. "Sometimes peace requires a demonstration. Danny Rodriguez isn't the type to let something like this slide. He's been king of Block C for 5 years now. What happened this morning makes him look weak, and weak kings don't stay kings very long in here." Santos nodded thoughtfully. "I understand his position, but I'm not interested in being anyone's king. I just want to do my time and get out." Jerry laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Son, you might not be interested in the game, but the game is definitely interested in you now. Danny's already putting together a crew to come for you. Word is he's calling in favors from other blocks." The information didn't seem to surprise Santos. He opened his book again, finding his place with practiced ease. "Thanks for the warning, Jerry. I appreciate it. That's it? That's your response?" Jerry leaned forward, confusion evident in his voice. "This man is planning to hurt you, maybe even kill you, and you're going back to reading philosophy?" Santos looked up again, and for just a moment, Jerry caught a glimpse of something cold and calculating behind those calm eyes. Jerry, I spent 10 years in a cage with men who trained every day to hurt people. I've been choked unconscious by world champions, had my bones nearly broken by the best grapplers on the planet. Danny Rodriguez throws eggs and relies on intimidation. The quiet confidence in Santos's voice sent a chill down Jerry's spine. This wasn't bravado or false courage. This was the calm certainty of a man who had tested himself against the best and emerged victorious. Besides, Santos continued, returning to his book, I'm not the one who should be worried. I know exactly what I'm capable of. Danny's about to find out what happens when prison politics meet professional violence. Jerry left the library with more questions than answers. He'd seen tough inmates before, men who could handle themselves in a fight. But Santos was something different. There was a precision to his movements, a calculated nature to his responses that suggested training far beyond what most people encountered in their lifetime. That evening, during rec time in the yard, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Danny's crew had grown throughout the day as he called in favors and made promises. Men from other blocks had joined his cause, drawn by the opportunity to align themselves with what they assumed would be the winning side. The group now numbered nearly 20, a small army by prison standards. They gathered near the weight pit, their presence impossible to ignore. Danny held court in the center, his arm still sore from the morning's encounter, but his voice strong as he outlined his plans for Santos. It was theater as much as strategy, a public display designed to restore his damaged reputation. Santos, meanwhile, sat alone on a bench near the basketball court, reading the same book he'd had in the library. Occasionally, he would look up to watch the game, but he showed no awareness of the growing crowd of hostile inmates gathering 50 yards away. His apparent indifference only fueled Danny's rage. "Look at him," Danny snarled to his assembled crew. "Sitting there like he owns the place, like he's better than all of us. Time to show him where he really stands." The group began moving across the yard with purpose, their formation loose but coordinated. Other inmates cleared out of the way. Some for the buildings heading to Avoy was about to happen. The guards D, witnessing what in the towers, noticed the movement, but didn't intervene immediately. As long as no weapons were visible, they were content to let the inmates sort out their own problems. Santos finally looked up from his book as the crowd approached. He marked his page carefully, set the book aside, and stood up slowly. There was no urgency in his movements, no sign of panic or fear. He simply prepared himself for what was coming with the same methodical approach he might use to tie his shoes. "Alex Santos," Danny called out, as his crew spread into a loose semicircle around the bench. "Time for your education to continue." Santos looked around the circle of hostile faces, counting opponents, assessing threats, calculating angles. His expression remained neutral, almost bored. 20 against 1 seems like overkill, don't you think? "Should have thought about that before you embarrassed me this morning," Danny replied. "Now you get to learn what respect costs in here." The first attacker came from Santos's left, a skinny man with prison tattoos covering his arms. He swung wild, aiming for Santos's head with all the technique of a drunk barroom brawler. Santos ducked under the punch, grabbed the man's extended arm, and used his own momentum to send him crashing into two other attackers. All three went down in a tangle of limbs and cursing. The rest of the group rushed forward simultaneously, hoping to overwhelm Santos through sheer numbers. But Santos moved like liquid mercury, flowing between attackers, using their aggression against them. A palm strike dropped one man instantly. An elbow to the solar plexus doubled another over, gasping for breath. A perfectly timed leg sweep sent a third sprawling across the concrete. Within 30 seconds, half of Danny's crew was on the ground, moaning in pain or struggling to catch their breath. The remaining attackers hesitated, suddenly unsure about their numerical advantage. Danny himself hadn't joined the initial rush, preferring to let his men soften Santos up before moving in for the finishing blow. But watching his carefully assembled army get dismantled by a single opponent was destroying what remained of his credibility. "Get him!" Danny roared, finally charging forward himself. His massive frame should have been an unstoppable force, but Santos simply stepped aside at the last second, grabbed Danny's momentum, and redirected it straight into the concrete wall of the building. The impact was loud enough to echo across the yard, and Danny crumpled to the ground, dazed and bleeding from a gash on his forehead. The remaining attackers looked at their fallen leader, then at Santos, who was standing calmly in the center of the carnage without a scratch on him. The fight went out of them immediately. They began backing away, helping their injured comrades to their feet, no longer interested in continuing the assault. Santos picked up his book from the bench and walked away, leaving 20 men in various states of defeat scattered across the yard. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 3 minutes, but its effects would ripple through Millbrook for months to come. As he disappeared into the building, inmates throughout the yard stood in stunned silence. The king of Block C had fallen, and in his place stood a man who had just redefined what power looked like in their world. Word traveled through Millbrook's corridors like electricity through copper wire. By dinner time, every cell block had heard the story. The new guy wasn't just some random inmate who got lucky. Alex Santos had been a professional fighter, and not just any fighter. He'd been undefeated in mixed martial arts before his conviction, a rising star whose career had been cut short by a manslaughter charge that landed him behind these concrete walls. The revelation changed everything. Inmates who had dismissed the yard incident as a fluke now understood they had witnessed something far more significant. This wasn't some street fighter who knew how to throw a punch. This was a trained killer who had spent years perfecting the science of human destruction. Danny Rodriguez lay in the infirmary with a concussion and 17 stitches in his forehead. The prison doctor, a tired man who had sewn up more inmates than he cared to remember, shook his head as he finished the last stitch. "You're lucky he held back," the doctor muttered, snipping the thread. "A few more pounds of force behind that impact and we'd be having a very different conversation." The lesson Alex Santos taught that day echoed through every cell block for years to come. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who looks the least threatening. Danny Rodriguez learned that respect earned through fear crumbles the moment you face someone who simply isn't afraid. Santos served the rest of his sentence in peace, not because he sought power, but because he had shown that true strength comes from discipline and restraint. Prison bullies prey on the weak, but they scatter like shadows when faced with someone who has mastered the art of controlled violence.